BMW entered the rider market with a very different plan from the one that eventually unfolded. Before the summer break, the German manufacturer had identified one name as its priority for 2027. That rider was Manuel Gonzalez. At just 23 years old, he was dominating the Moto2 World Championship, carrying a remarkable 51.5-point advantage over the rest of the field. On paper, he looked like the obvious investment, a young rider, winning consistently, with plenty of years ahead of him. Then everything changed. On July 29th, BMW announced the signing of Brad Binder instead. Not long before that announcement, KTM had already decided Binder would not be part of its future project. After 7 seasons in MotoGP, the South African suddenly found himself without a factory ride. Within days, he had secured one of the most attractive seats in World Superbikes. And almost immediately after BMW made its choice, Gonzalez reportedly began exploring another option, reaching out to Ducati in the hope that a factory superbike opportunity was still available. Unfortunately for him, that opportunity had almost disappeared before the conversation even began. At first glance, these look like unrelated contract negotiations. But when you connect the timeline, a much bigger picture starts to emerge. This isn't simply about BMW deciding between two riders. It's about the way the entire 2027 rider market operates. It raises an uncomfortable question. Why is the current Moto2 Championship leader struggling to secure a future, while riders being released from MotoGP continue to receive the first opportunities? The answer has very little to do with race results. During the past 6 days alone, Gonzalez watched 3 major opportunities disappear one after another. None of those doors closed because he lacked speed. None closed because he wasn't winning races. In fact, he's the most successful rider in Moto2 this season. Yet somehow, success hasn't strengthened his position. Instead, it seems to have complicated it. The sequence began on July 26th. Tech3 confirmed the final rookie place on the 2027 MotoGP grid, and surprisingly, the team selected Senna Agius. That decision caught many observers off guard. Both Agius and Gonzalez raced together for intact GP. They ride identical machinery. They share data. They work inside the same garage every race weekend. And almost every weekend, Gonzalez finishes ahead. Despite that direct comparison, Tech3 placed its faith in Agius rather than the rider currently leading the championship. With that decision, the final available rookie seat in MotoGP effectively disappeared. 3 days later, another setback arrived. BMW completed its agreement with Brad Binder. The timing was significant. Binder had only recently learned that KTM would not extend his contract as the Austrian manufacturer reshaped its lineup for the upcoming 850 cubic centimeters regulations. Instead of continuing with Binder, KTM chose to build around Alex Marquez and Fabio Di Giannantonio, 2 riders who had recently proven capable of winning MotoGP races. Binder became the sacrifice. Yet being released by KTM didn't leave him unemployed for long. BMW moved immediately. And in doing so, it passed over the rider many believed was already next in line. The interesting part isn't simply that BMW signed Binder. It's why they did. Because they weren't choosing between a veteran and an unknown prospect. They were choosing between the current Moto2 Championship leader, with multiple victories already this season, and a rider whose MotoGP career had just come to an unexpected end. BMW chose experience. BMW chose certainty. BMW chose someone whose strengths had already been measured at the highest level of motorcycle racing. That decision says far more about today's rider market than it does about either individual rider. BMW's decision becomes even more interesting once you look beyond Binder alone. Because Binder wasn't the only former KTM factory rider they committed to. Almost at the same time, Miguel Oliveira also secured his future with BMW, signing a 2-year agreement that even includes an option for a 3rd season. That detail matters. Teams don't hand out multi-year contracts when they're looking for temporary solutions. They do it when they're building a long-term project. Put Binder and Oliveira side by side, and a clear pattern starts to appear. BMW hasn't simply signed 2 experienced riders. It has effectively recreated the core of KTM's former MotoGP factory lineup inside its World Superbike program. These are riders who already understand factory development, know how to work with engineers, and have years of experience racing prototype motorcycles at the highest level. For BMW, that's knowledge money can't easily buy. Which naturally leads to another question. If Gonzalez was widely expected to inherit one of those seats, why did BMW suddenly abandon that plan? The answer may have started weeks earlier. Danilo Petrucci joined BMW with high expectations, but the partnership never truly clicked. Finding confidence with the bike proved more difficult than anticipated, and on June 30th, BMW quietly decided not to activate the option that would have kept him for another season. That left an empty seat. For almost an entire month, the vacancy remained open. Many inside the paddock assumed Gonzalez was perfectly positioned to take it. Leading the Moto2 Championship. Exactly the kind of rider manufacturers usually describe as the future. Instead, BMW waited. Then, the moment Brad Binder became available, everything changed. The empty seat that many expected to belong to Gonzalez was suddenly handed to a rider MotoGP had just released. That isn't a coincidence. It's a reflection of how manufacturers evaluate risk. From BMW's perspective, Binder wasn't simply another rider on the market. He was a proven benchmark. 7 seasons of MotoGP experience. Years of factory development work. Thousands of laps gathering technical data on prototype machinery. Those are assets no Moto2 rider, regardless of talent, can bring. And BMW clearly believed those assets were worth more than potential. But Gonzalez's difficult week wasn't over. After missing out on BMW, attention quickly shifted toward Ducati's factory World Superbike team. On paper, it looked like another possible route. In reality, that opportunity was already slipping away. One seat had effectively disappeared before negotiations even started. Iker Lecuona? No, that's not the rider involved here. The second factory seat had already been secured, leaving only the position expected to be vacated by Nicolo Bulega. Naturally, Gonzalez's camp explored the possibility. But there was another problem. Franco Morbidelli had also entered the picture. Like Binder, Morbidelli was another experienced MotoGP rider facing an uncertain future in the Premier class. And almost immediately he emerged as the favorite to take Bulega's place. If that happens, the pattern repeats itself. Twice in the space of a single week, the Moto2 Championship leader loses out to riders coming directly from MotoGP. That's the moment this story stops looking like bad luck. Instead, it starts looking like the unwritten policy governing rider recruitment. Moto2 results may earn headlines. MotoGP experience still wins contracts. The clearest explanation actually came from KTM Motorsport director Pit Beirer. When asked to compare Manuel Gonzalez and Senna Agius, Beirer didn't dodge the question. He openly admitted that, as things stand today, Gonzalez is the stronger Moto2 rider. But then he added something far more revealing. He wasn't convinced Gonzalez would necessarily become the better MotoGP rider. That distinction changes everything. Because teams aren't recruiting based solely on what riders have already achieved. They're investing in what they believe those riders might become. Moto2 trophies measure the present. Factories are trying to predict the future. And sometimes, those two things point in completely different directions. For Gonzalez, that's the uncomfortable reality. His performances leave very little to question. His speed is obvious. His consistency is proven. His championship lead speaks for itself. Ironically, that certainty may have reduced the sense of mystery surrounding him. Teams already know exactly what Gonzalez is. What they don't know is whether someone else might eventually become even better. And in modern MotoGP, potential often carries a higher value than proof. That may sound unfair. But rider markets have never been driven by fairness. They've always been driven by projection. And right now, projection appears to be beating performance. Manuel Gonzalez's manager, Eddie Rivelli, understands exactly what his rider is competing against. And it isn't simply the stopwatch. Speaking about the current market, Ravelli summed it up with one sentence that perfectly captures the situation. Everyone is searching for the next Marc Marquez, but there is only one Marc Marquez. That wasn't just a clever quote. It was a criticism of how modern MotoGP evaluates young talent. Teams aren't only looking for riders who are winning today. They're chasing the possibility of discovering the next once-in-a-generation superstar. And that's an incredibly difficult standard for anyone to meet. No matter how dominant Gonzalez has been in Moto2, he isn't being judged solely on his race victories. He's being compared against an idea, a possibility, a future that nobody can actually prove exists. Once you look across the entire 2027 rookie class, another pattern becomes impossible to ignore. David Alonso is heading to Honda. Daniel Holgado has secured a place with Gresini Ducati. Isan Guevara joins Pramac Yamaha. Nicolo Bulega makes the move to VR46. Senna Agius graduates with Tech3 KTM. 5 rookies. 5 different stories. Yet they all share something Gonzalez doesn't. Each arrives with a powerful manufacturer, academy, or long-term factory project already standing behind them. That support matters. Modern MotoGP rarely promotes riders in isolation anymore. Factories prefer to develop talent from within their own systems. Young riders are identified years before reaching Moto2. They receive factory backing, technical support, coaching, sponsorship opportunities, and relationships that continue growing throughout their careers. By the time the MotoGP seat becomes available, those riders aren't strangers anymore. They're already investments. Gonzalez followed a different path. He built his reputation through results rather than manufacturer backing. There is no major academy lobbying on his behalf. No factory contract guiding his next move. No corporate project depending on his promotion. He simply wins races. Ironically, that may not be enough. Nationality also plays a bigger role than many fans like to admit. On paper, being Spanish should be an advantage. Spain has produced some of the greatest riders in MotoGP history. But the current grid is already overflowing with Spanish talent. When manufacturers already have multiple Spanish riders under contract, another one doesn't necessarily increase the team's commercial value. In today's championship, diversity has become part of the business model. Factories think about sponsors, markets, television audiences, national fan bases. Sometimes those conversations happen long before lap times are discussed. Nicolo Bulega unintentionally revealed that reality during the summer. While discussing his own future, he admitted that if he were running the team, keeping an Italian rider inside the factory garage would be important. That statement wasn't really about himself. It was about the commercial and political realities behind rider selection. Speed opens the conversation. Business often decides how it ends. That's why Gonzalez's situation has never really been a straightforward choice between MotoGP and World Superbikes. Many fans assumed he was carefully weighing different offers. In truth, there may never have been multiple offers to choose from. Instead of selecting between opportunities, he found himself waiting for opportunities that never fully appeared. That's a huge difference. Even leading the Moto2 World Championship couldn't guarantee a seat. In fact, dominating the category may have created an unexpected problem. At 23 years old, Gonzalez is no longer viewed as an unknown prospect. He's a finished product. Teams understand exactly what they would be signing. And once certainty replaces speculation, the market begins assigning a value. Factories love uncertainty, provided they believe it could lead to greatness. That's why a rider with fewer achievements but greater perceived upside can sometimes attract more attention than a proven champion. It sounds contradictory. Yet history shows it happens repeatedly. The lesson from the 2027 rider market is surprisingly brutal. Winning Moto2 is no longer an automatic gateway to MotoGP. It proves what you've accomplished. It doesn't guarantee what comes next. Meanwhile, riders leaving MotoGP arrive with something manufacturers value even more. They've raced prototype motorcycles. They've worked directly with factory engineers. They've contributed to development programs. Their strengths and weaknesses are already documented. There are fewer unknowns. And in a sport where millions of euros depend on every decision, reducing uncertainty often becomes more valuable than chasing potential. That's why Brad Binder found a new future almost immediately after losing his KTM ride. And it's why Manuel Gonzalez, despite leading the Moto2 standings, continues searching for one. In the end, BMW's decision wasn't necessarily a rejection of Gonzalez's talent. It was a reflection of how today's paddock assigns value. They weren't asking who was winning Moto2. They were asking which investment carried the lowest risk. Those are two completely different questions. And right now, the answers are shaping the entire 2027 grid. So here's the question for you. If you were making the decision, would you sign the rider dominating Moto2 today? Or the MotoGP veteran who already knows what it takes to compete at the highest level? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into the politics behind the rider market, don't forget to subscribe to GP Overtake and check out the next video on your screen, where we uncover another story the paddock isn't talking about.